Hello everyone, this is Bentley from Kent, Washington, and if you can't tell by this thing right here, it's time we talk about the Fluval Plant, or the Fluval 3.0 as we more commonly call it. I'm not going to give you any trumped up stuff here. Every Fluval 3.0 that I have, I've paid for out of my own pocket. None have been sponsored, none have been discounted in any way. They've all come out of my pocket, and I keep getting more of them for other tanks. So, like you can see here, this is your packaging, what you're looking for. We're going to talk about this light because I've had a lot of experience with this now. We're looking at, I think, about a year that these things have been out, and I've had one almost the whole time. I use them in my Plants for Profit tank. I use them in the Guppy Mansion. I use them on some of my new tanks. I absolutely love this light, and we're going to go into why. So, without further ado, we're going to jump into a little bit of video and some screenshots so you guys can see some of my personal settings. We'll talk about those, and then we'll talk a little bit more about why this light is by far the best bang for your buck you're going to get. So let's talk about why this light is so good, or at least in my opinion, why it's so good. Keep in mind, everything here is based on my opinion. There's going to be a million different opinions out there. Some people are going to say that, oh no, you should buy a Kessel, you should buy a Current. Why would you ever spend that much money on a light? Go buy a Beamswork, go buy a Night Crew. Why would you use that light when you could use the blah blah blah, the Phoenix 24/7? You know, like, pick your light. There's always going to be someone who has a different opinion. This is based on mine, and as you guys know, I grow a lot of plants, and I'm going to approach this from the perspective of someone who wants to do a planted tank. So here's the basics. One, they have a 3-year warranty. Almost no light has a warranty that long. Like, even the most expensive Kessels only have a year. Twin Stars have like a year. The Kessel might be wrong, but I know like a Twin Star only has a year. The Twin Star is like considered like it's amazing light, but it's going to cost you 2 or 3 times as much as a Fluval 3.0. Have 1/3 the warranty, and I don't honestly think the difference is that big, especially if your tank is larger than a nano tank. If you have something like a 40 breeder, a 75, any like 3 to 4 foot tank, you're going to spend so much on those lights that it's not worth it. Are there cons? They're a little expensive. I mean, you're going to pay between $150 and $200 for a light, depending on the size of the tank. I think, if I remember right, like, I got all mine from Aquarium Co-op. They're just a local business. That's why I bought from them. But the ones I bought, I think, were all between $150 and $175, depending on whether it was the 3-foot light or the 4-foot light. I don't have any of the smaller ones. I think they get a little cheaper when you go a little smaller, but they are a little expensive. They're worth it. They're worth every penny. So first off, there's 6500K, which is the closest to sunlight that we can create on the Kelvin scale with an LED or bulb light of any form. They're controllable, and we're going to go over some of my settings in just a second so you can see exactly what I use in my tanks. You can do sunrise and sunset, so you get the ramp up. You can program everything. It's a free application that you can use on your smart device, so iOS or Android. You can just hook it up to your cell phone. You can control every single device that you own. I think I have like 6 running on mine now. We'll see that in just a sec. And each one can be individually programmed. You can save profiles. to export them across multiple devices. You can name each device to make it easy to recognize which one you're working with. They'll hold settings when you lose power. When I lost power for 55 hours, all I had to go in and do is open each light on my app, and they automatically resynced back up to the app and went right back on their timers like nothing had happened. But when they got power back, they were in their basic power mode, which is their default. And then I just went through and synced them to each thing, and they automatically went straight back to their programming. No hassle, no nothing. These are just incredible lights. They have good power. They only take 59 watts for like the 4-foot version. I think it's the smallest or 50 watts. So it's not a ton of power required. They have very high par. You guys have seen like Aquarium Co-op's video, a little lower par than the 2.0, the previous Fluval light. But for how much customization you get in this light, and there's some differences also in how wide it covers. It covers a 120-degree angle. Most only cover, like 90 degrees. They have these really shallow depth of field of what the light is doing. This is really broad. So a single light can light a lot of your tank a lot better than most others could, where a lot of times you would need 2 or 3 lights to cover, say, like a 40 breeder or a 75. You're probably only going to need one Fluval 3.0. That's just the easy stuff. I would say that the more important thing is the level of control you get with this light, how you can control your light spectrum. So you have 5 main light spectrums in this light. You have blue, pink, which is your red tones for the most part, warm white, bright white, and cool white. So cool white is going to be like that kind of 7,000 to 10,000 K on the Kelvin scale. Bright white is the 6,500, and warm white, if you were on a normal Kelvin scale, would be like that 4,500 to 5,500 Kelvin scale, where it's a little more orange. The cool white is a little more blue. But the mixture of these things allows us to really control a lot of things and get an optimal growing spectrum for almost any plant out there. Honestly, if you need a light more powerful than this for a plant, you're growing something really crazy and really difficult, and you might be doing it, there might be some other problem that you're running into. So let's dive in and look at some screenshots of my personal settings, and I'll explain everything that I'm doing, and you'll get just a better feel for how I like these lights and why I like using these lights. So let's go ahead and dive into my tanks. As you can see with my Fluval Smart app, I have 6 tanks total running these lights. You can see the 2 plant tanks, which are the 40 breeders, the ungulum tank that has the bozeman eyes and the ungulums in it, Little Russia, which is the Guppy Palace, and then the 40 long that we just set up in last week's video. We'll start with the Guppy Mansion. Here you can see this is a pretty mature tank. You can see the sunrise, the daylight, the sunset, and the night. You'll notice that I have almost everything cranked very high except the blue, and let me explain why. I have noticed in this particular light that if your blue gets very high, you will see a lot more algae. So as we move over to Plant 2, which this is the Plant for Profit tank, you'll notice again, the blue spectrum is very low. All the white spectrums are cranked to 100%. The pink spectrum is about 89. You can do 90. Sometimes it's hard to get the slider perfect. This is what I like a mature tank at. Very high white light, especially when I'm using CO2. Lots of red light. Very little blue, because that blue is an actinic blue, and actinic blue in fresh water can cause lots of algae, especially blackbeard algae. We're going to dive in a little closer to let you really look at the daylight hours of this tank. You can see 100, 100, 100, 80s, 13% or so. I mean, the blue is very low. I have it slightly different tank to tank. I think this one's 19%. I think the Guppy tank is 25. But when I first start a tank out, like this example, here's the 40 long. Notice how much lower this is. Now, for a shallow tank, you want less light. The 40 breeder and the 40 long are about the same height. So as this tank is just starting, you'll notice I'm in the 50% range for light. You could dial this down even lower if you don't have a lot of plants to start with to help reduce the chance of algae taking over. But then look at the blue spectrum and the red spectrum. The blue is insanely low, like 3%. We'll dive in just a sec here to show you. Notice that. Look how little that blue is. Only like 20% pink, and then in the 50s and 40 ranges for my whites. This is because you want to give the plants a chance to settle in and start growing before the algae can take over. And more importantly, before you crank your light up. So there you go. There's the settings directly from a couple of my tanks, and almost all my tanks are exactly the same. Some of those numbers I actually took screenshots before I did some adjustments for some of the current. So like I said, I think my current tank is 19% on Plants for Profit. That's because I've dialed it up just a touch from that screenshot you saw. But let's say we're starting a brand new tank. You're going to set it up with Fluval 3.0. What should you do? First off, how tall is that tank? If we're talking a 40 breeder or a 75, something that's not quite as tall, maybe you got a 40 long just like mine. We're going to dial that down. Say we're going to start at like 50% on the whites, about 25 to 30% on the red, and bring that blue way down, 3%, 1%, no more than 5%. You really want to prevent the actinic light from getting in there and giving your algae a chance to outcompete your plants early on. Then also, how heavily are we planting, and do those plants need highlight in the first place? If we're doing stuff like Java Fern, Anubias, these don't need highlight at all. Bring that all the way down to 25% on your whites and accordingly lower on the red. So go down to like 15% red and 1% blue. Almost nothing. Cap out at 3% blue. Then over time, as your plants start to grow and settle into your new tank, start slowly dialing your light up. If you're doing a low light tank, no more than 50%. That's going to be your cap, is the 50% power. If you're doing lots of really tough tank plants where you need CO2, lots of red, stuff like that, you're going to eventually get to like my Plants for Profit tank, where you're 100% on all your whites, in that 80 to 90 range on your reds. And then as that tank matures and really settles in, we're talking several months down the line, when you've got lots of good growth, you've probably trimmed it once or twice. Now you can look at dialing your blue up, I would say, to tops 25% for a system with CO2. Without CO2, I would say 10% to 13 or 14% is really where you want to be. I've just noticed in the past that I've seen lots of algae issues if that blue gets too much higher with CO2, higher than 25%. The base setting from Fluval, I think, is like 50 or 60% on the blue. And I tried it for a little while as an experiment versus some of my own personalized settings. I had lots of different settings for a while. And these are what I've settled on after basically a year of work. And you guys know I grow lots of plants. I keep them very dense in my tanks. Even this really simple tank back here that is what I would consider very low light is very dense in its plant growth, as Tails is taking a break up in the corner there. So you want to slowly gauge your light up. And the Fluval makes it really great. The other thing that I think is really important on your sunrises and sunset, I like them at an hour and a half each, unless that tank is really, really high light. And even those, I've started shifting my sunrises and sunsets to be an hour and a half long. It's a slower ramp up and a slower ramp down. So a lot of times what I can do is I can start my CO2 like 15 to 20 minutes before the lights start to ramp up. That allows the CO2 to get up to where it needs to be, to its kind of plateau as we hit maximum light. Because you guys know I do low and slow on my CO2. And then finally, we get to full light. Our plants are synthesizing. They're using all that CO2 in the water column. I haven't had issues with any of my fish doing it this way. And as you guys know and have seen in some of that video, I get some spectacular plant growth with brilliant colors. And I just have found the most success using this system and this setup. And that's why I wanted to do it for you guys here. So if I was to review this product, I kind of really did when I said that this is the best bang for your buck. And I mean that. Yes, it's a little expensive to start, but honestly, I don't think there is anything better on the market unless you start spending some really crazy amount of money, $600-700 per light. And I personally don't like spending that much money on light unless I'm trying to go for, if I was trying to do a super amazing rimless showcase tank where it was all about aquascaping and all about the plants and very little about the fish, maybe then I would look at it. But even then, I would be hard pressed to go the route of something like a Kessel or a Twin Star or the ADA light, the UNS lights. They're so expensive when I can get such success out of a Fluval and I can control it very easily from my smartphone. I think it's the combination of that ease of use, but that incredible power and control just makes this the best light on the market for us Planet Aquarium people. Does it look the best? It's kind of a thin black bar. You might not like that aesthetic. But honestly, I don't think there is a better light out there for the beginner, even up to the expert hobbyist, to use for a Planet tank. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome.